Inside the Tower of Challenge, Suho was thinking about the records that had been set before him. In his past life, the highest record for the tower was 48 floors, which was achieved by a team. Right now, the highest record was only 29 floors, and that was also completed with a team. Suho knew how hard the tower could be, especially when going alone. Without any hesitation, he quickly moved forward and fought an undead enemy that was blocking his way. Usually, the tower was tackled with a group of hunters. The strength of the monsters in the tower depended on the number of challengers, and the experience gained was shared among the group. It was often smarter and safer to challenge the tower as a team because it made progress more manageable. But Suho wasn't interested in doing things the normal way. He was confident in his skills and preferred to handle things his way. Surrounded by defeated enemies that gave off a faint blue glow, Suho looked up as a notification appeared. After a short time, the system told him he had cleared the 18th floor. The system then asked if he wanted to move on to the 19th floor. Without hesitation, Suho agreed. He moved forward with confidence, excitement in his eyes. The 19th floor was different from the others. Instead of facing many enemies, there was just one. This meant the enemy would be much stronger. Suho's feet moved quickly as he ran, energy flowing through him. The single monster on the 19th floor was powerful. But the good part was that Suho only had to defeat one enemy to clear the floor. Suddenly, a giant figure appeared in the distance. It was a huge orc, its muscular body covered in red hair. Without wasting any time, Suho charged at it, drawing his sword and pushing forward with determination. He attacked the monster with a powerful strike, shouting a challenge as he did. His sword glowed, cutting through the air and hitting the orc with an unstoppable force. Blood splattered as the orc fell, defeated by Suho's quick and strong attack. The system notified him of his success. "You have conquered the 19th floor." Another message popped up, asking if he wanted to move on to the 20th floor. Suho stood still for a moment, looking at the fallen orc. He decided to wait and not answer the prompt just yet. He took a moment to calm himself, looking at the remains of the orc. Unlike the previous floors, something felt different about the 19th. Normally, monsters in the tower would disappear right after they were defeated, leaving no trace behind. However, the red gain, this particular enemy, didn't vanish immediately. Suho walked over to the large tusk that the creature had dropped, a smile appearing on his face as he picked it up. He realized that this was exactly what he had been searching for. As he examined the tusk closely, he understood that it wasn't something that could be used on its own. It had a specific purpose. Holding the tusk, Suho activated his magic detection ability, causing a shimmering aura to surround him. The area glowed softly, revealing a hidden spot on the nearby wall. He murmured to himself that he had found it and focused on a glowing indentation in the stone. He approached the wall and placed the tusk into the indentation. With a low rumble, a portal appeared, swirling with cosmic energy. Suho's eyes lit up in satisfaction. He realized that this was the subspace fortress of the fortress king, ᴄᴏᴘᴘыឫ. He knew that defeating the red gain had given him access to this special subspace. Unlike other items that created limited subspaces, this fortress allowed living beings to enter and exit freely. It was a rare and valuable power. Without wasting any time, Suho stepped through the portal. He found himself in a dim cave, lit by the glow of a floating orb. As he walked closer to the orb, he noticed it was getting brighter. The system spoke again, telling him that the previous owner of the subspace fortress had died and asking if he would become the new owner. Suho answered without hesitation, placing his hand on the glowing orb. The system congratulated him on becoming the new owner of the subspace fortress. The light in his palm grew brighter, swirling around him as he closed his hand, feeling the power of his new ownership surge through him. Suho realized that it wasn't just an item, it was a skill now. This was a unique feature. The fortress wasn't just a place to store things, it was now part of him, linked to his magic. He could sense that the subspace would evolve and grow based on his abilities. Suddenly, everything around him glowed, and the environment shifted. The system announced, "The subspace fortress has been reconstructed." Suho shielded his eyes from the burst of light, and when the light faded and he lowered his hand, he found himself standing in a lavish modern room. He hadn't expected it to have this feature, and he looked around in surprise. He thought to himself that it felt like he could just go home after fighting monsters. It was even better than he had imagined. The space seemed to be designed just for him, and he appreciated how convenient it was. The system explained that the fortress would grow in size and usefulness as his magic power increased. Suho smiled, feeling proud that he had prevented Zhang Pyongo from gaining the skill. He remembered how, in his past life, the smuggler had caused trouble by using the fortress to hide everything from illegal items to stolen treasures, and even kidnapped people. Now, all that potential was in the right hands. Suho thought to himself that by stopping the Fortress King from ever emerging and securing the fortress for himself, he had gotten a great deal. His confidence grew even stronger. With his new fortress and renewed determination, Suho was ready for whatever came next. He decided it was time to keep moving up. His voice was filled with resolve as he declared that the Tower of Challenge awaited, and he was determined to conquer every floor. Outside the Tower of Challenge, Jin Hui stood quietly, looking at his phone as he scrolled through an article. The headline immediately caught his attention, on Suho. The article praised Suho's remarkable performance in the recent Awakener rankings, where he had outperformed even the most experienced challengers. It also mentioned Nexus, which was getting a lot of attention lately. Jin Hui thought to himself that many students would likely be drawn to Nexus after reading this article, which would only increase its popularity. But then he remembered that Suho had mentioned wanting to join the Korean Hunter Association. However, the article suggested that Nexus Publishing was already working to bring him on board, showing their confidence in securing him before anyone else could. Jin Hui wondered how far Suho had gone in the tower by now. He thought about it for a moment when suddenly a notification from the system startled him. The 30th floor has been conquered. Jin Hui blinked in shock. That was fast. He wondered if Suho was really there when the record was broken. This was sure to be a hot update. Then, another system message popped up, saying that the highest record for the Tower of Challenge had been updated, and a new challenger was now taking on the 31st floor. People around him began to murmur, speculating which guild might be behind the new record. Some wondered if a large guild had sent a party to conquer the floor, but Jin Hui, with growing suspicion, narrowed his eyes. Could it be Suho? The system continued to show updates. The 31st floor has now been conquered. Jin Hui's jaw tightened. Only a short time had passed since the challenge began, and now the 31st floor was conquered. If it was really Suho, his progress was even faster than Jin Hui had expected. He had initially thought Suho relied on flashy moves and luck, but now it was clear. Suho was no ordinary awakener. At the top of the tower, a crystal glowed, and the system announced, the challenger's name is Player in Suho. Now, Player in Suho had started to challenge the 32nd floor. Jin Hui's jaw dropped as he stood there, feeling a mix of awe and disbelief. He couldn't help but think to himself that he would always be linked to Suho from now on. Meanwhile, inside Nexus Academy, Director Kim was reading the new article, her eyes wide in shock. The man beside her quickly explained that Suho was setting a new record in real time. It was hard to believe, but Director Kim's mind was already racing with possibilities. She adjusted her glasses, her thoughts sharp and focused. To bring someone like Suho to Nexus, they would need to offer a sum beyond their wildest dreams. Without wasting any time, she instructed her team to contact the president and office manager and head straight to headquarters. She wouldn't let anyone else take Suho, because he was the one who would become Nexus's ace. Back with Suho, he continued his climb in the tower, making steady progress. Soon, the system notified him that he had conquered the 48th floor. Suho, slightly out of breath, knelt on the ground with his sword embedded in the floor. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, his muscles aching from the strain. Rushing through the tower was certainly tough. The system then congratulated him for achieving a great accomplishment and told him that he would be awarded 5 bonus stats for his success. Suho smiled and opened his status window, his eyes lingering on the numbers before him. He was now level 39, and what truly stood out to him were his stats. The best stat he could possibly see was right there. He let out a quiet chuckle. Reaching level 39 felt like a significant milestone. But what really impressed him was the bonus stats he received. Gaining 5 bonus stats every time he broke a record felt almost too good to be true. To lift his spirits even further, he decided to allocate the points to his magic. Awakening his spear was his current priority, and boosting his magic seemed to be the best path forward. A bright light filled the air as the system updated his stats. Feeling more energized than before, Suho stood up. The final challenge was ahead, and he was ready to face it. In front of him, a massive crystal appeared, glowing with intense light. This crystal marked the highest point of the tower, signaling that the challenge for the 49th floor had begun. Suho's heart raced as he steeled himself for what was to come. The crystal's energy filled the arena, and a dark, swirling mass of power formed at the center. A great roar echoed across the battlefield, and from the shadows emerged the tower dragon, a level 49 boss, the guardian of this floor. Its massive wings spread wide, casting a terrifying shadow over the arena. Despite the overwhelming power radiating from the dragon, Suho remained calm. Level 49? He thought. This is completely out of balance. The dragon, though not pure-blooded, was likely a dragonborn, and Suho knew how dangerous that could be. But he didn't flinch. As the dragon let out another roar, Suho felt his determination harden. The fight ahead would be brutal, but he had come this far. There was no turning back now. Well, what can I do? I came here to conquer it, Suho thought, gripping his sword tightly. The final battle began with a crash as Suho charged forward, his resolve stronger than ever. He would face the dragon and take the final step in his journey to become the first human to conquer this tower of challenge. The dragon's roar echoed through the battlefield as Suho's attack landed, but it barely made a dent. The creature's thick scales absorbed the blow without flinching. It thrashed violently, attempting to shake off the strike, its eyes glowing with fury as it glared down at Suho, its prey. Suho had expected the creature to be tough, but this was on another level. The sheer power of the dragon was beyond anything he had imagined, and his weapon had done little to harm it. The dragon charged at Suho, and the sheer force of its movement cracked the ground beneath it. Suho couldn't believe how quickly such a massive creature moved. It's almost cheating, he thought. He had no choice but to evade, gripping his weapon tightly as he adjusted his stance, readying himself for the next attack. Despite the dragon's enormous size and strength, Suho remained determined. The dragon's growl rumbled through the air, a deep, menacing sound. It took another step forward, its shadow growing larger and larger over Suho. Although the creature was clearly enraged, Suho didn't back down. He knew this fight was far from over. The dragon's eyes narrowed, glowing with a furious energy. Suho could feel the tension building in the air as the ground beneath them trembled. Cracks began to form around the creature as it gathered its power, a sign of an imminent attack. Suho knew that whatever was coming next would be devastating. Suddenly, the dragon let out a deafening roar. A shockwave rippled across the battlefield, sending rocks and debris flying in all directions. Suho reacted instantly, darting to the side to avoid the incoming rubble. Suho's instincts kicked in as he leapt to the side, narrowly dodging a jagged rock that flew toward him. His movements were quick and precise, honed over years of battle. The dragon was powerful, but Suho's agility kept him one step ahead. As the dust settled, Suho crouched behind a broken wall, carefully observing the dragon. The creature prowled, its glowing eyes scanning the area for any sign of movement. Suho knew he had to remain hidden. He kept his focus, analyzing the dragon's next move. The creature's level wasn't as high as he had feared, but its durability was still a huge issue. The dragon's scales were incredibly tough, and regular attacks wouldn't be enough to penetrate them. Suho knew he needed to find a weak spot, something he could exploit for a decisive blow. As he observed the dragon's movements, his eyes shifted to its tail. There, barely visible, was a single gray scale. Suho's heart skipped a beat. It was the reverse scale, the dragon's most vulnerable point. The weak spot was right there, hidden but unmistakable. He knew striking it would deal massive damage, but timing would be everything. Crouching lower behind the broken wall, Suho took a deep breath. He knew the dragon was still searching for him, unaware of his discovery. The creature's heavy footsteps shook the ground as it prowled, eyes scanning for any movement. Suho's pulse quickened. His mind was entirely focused on the task at hand. He gripped his weapon tightly, readying himself for the right moment. He couldn't afford to miss. The battle had reached its tipping point, and everything depended on whether or not he could land the strike at the perfect moment. As the dragon continued its search, Suho's body tensed, preparing to spring into action. The time to strike had come. Suho made a rapid, agile jump from behind the crumbling wall, darting forward with precision. His movements were swift, calculated. His eyes locked onto the faint, glowing mark on the dragon's tail. This was the weak point, the one spot that could change the course of the battle. He readied his sword, the cool metal steady in his grip. His gaze never wavered. Everything had led to this single strike. Suho swung with all his strength. The blade collided with the reverse scale in a powerful blow, and he pushed with every ounce of his might, attempting to dislodge the scale. The impact reverberated through the air. The dragon's eyes widened in shock and pain. For a split second, everything seemed to freeze, the dragon paralyzed in realization. Then, chaos erupted. The dragon let out a deafening roar, its pain turning into a fury-driven rage. Suho felt the backlash instantly, thrown backward by the sheer force of the dragon's violent movements. Suho tumbled, barely managing to keep a grip on his weapon as the dragon thrashed violently. The ground beneath them shook with each movement, and the air was thick with the raw fury of the beast. He landed roughly, but he managed to steady himself just in time to see the dragon's eyes flare with rage. As expected, this won't end easily, Suho thought, his breathing heavy. He could feel the weight of the battle pressing on him. The longer this fight went on, the more disadvantageous it became. The dragon's power was relentless, and with each passing moment, the gap between their strengths seemed to widen. Suho knew he had no time to waste. There was no room for hesitation now. Determination burned in his eyes as he gathered his resolve. His muscles ached, and his body was slick with sweat, but his mind remained sharp and clear. He had to destroy the reverse scale. It was his only chance. "Take this," he roared, driving his sword with all his might into the dragon's scales. His arms strained, every bit of energy he had left poured into the strike. The blade bit into the dragon's tough hide, and the dragon let out another bellowing roar. Energy swirled around it in a violent spiral, and a deep purple radiance began to spread from its body, crackling with intense power. Suho knew the dragon wasn't done yet. The battle was far from over. The dragon's roar reverberated through the arena, and Suho braced himself for the incoming attack. But instead of an immediate strike, he was met with a system notification. The tower dragon uses dragon fear. Instantly, Suho felt a crushing pressure weighing down on him, a suffocating force that seemed to chill his very soul. His expression remained resolute, but a cold sweat began to bead on his forehead. The fear washed over him, sinking deep into his bones, slowing his every movement. It felt like invisible chains were binding his body, holding him in place. His legs grew heavy, and every step felt like wading through mud. The weight of the fear crushed him, seeping into his mind, fogging his thoughts. His head pounded, his vision swam, and the world around him seemed to distort. Echoes of the dragon's roar reverberated in his ears, blending into a cacophony of chaos. Another notification appeared. "You have fallen into a state of fear. Your muscles have become stiff." Suho grit his teeth, struggling against the overwhelming sensation. His body was paralyzed with terror, but he couldn't afford to fall now. "Cure," he thought desperately, activating his skill. He could feel his energy drain as he fought to rid himself of the fear's grip. A new notification flashed before him. "Cure activated. But it is a high-level fear. It cannot be cancelled." Suho's heart sank. The fear was too powerful. Even his skill couldn't rid him of it. His current capabilities weren't enough to fight it off. The dragon's massive form shifted, its aura glowing with an even more menacing intensity. The ground trembled beneath the dragon's weight, each step like a thunderclap. Suho steadied himself, his body stiff and weak under the crushing fear. The realization hit him hard. The dragon was far from finished, and its fury had only grown. The dragon's eyes glowed with rage, and Suho knew he had to act quickly. The situation was getting more dangerous, and he was running out of time. Suddenly, the dragon twisted its massive body, and with a powerful whip of its tail, it slammed into the wall, trying to knock Suho off. Suho barely managed to hang on, but the force of the impact sent a shockwave through his entire body. He could feel his grip slipping, and the situation was becoming critical. Both Suho and the dragon were driven by an unyielding determination, neither willing to back down. The next moment, Suho was flung through a portal by the dragon's powerful movement. He was tossed violently across space and crashed heavily onto the ground. Pain shot through Suho's body as he rolled to a stop. He knew he needed to act fast. He forced himself to move despite the pain. Quickly, he summoned a blue potion from his inventory and drank it in one swift gulp. As he drank, the dragon's roar echoed from the other side of the portal. The soothing energy from the potion flooded his body, and a notification appeared. You have consumed a purification potion. Fear and hallucination states lifted. Suho collapsed to the ground, panting heavily. He had survived the worst, and the overwhelming tension in his body started to ease. He took a moment to catch his breath and assess the situation. He realized he was safe for now. The portal skill had worked as a perfect escape, and the dragon couldn't follow him into the subspace fortress. He let out a strained chuckle, thinking to himself that he was lucky he'd bought a purification potion from the general market just in case. He hadn't expected to use it so soon. Suho wiped the sweat from his forehead, his body still exhausted. He knew that simply dispelling the dragon's fear wouldn't be enough to protect him for long. Cure spells wouldn't work. He couldn't keep running back to the fortress to use purification potions repeatedly. It was clear he needed a new plan. He needed to think of something that could end this battle once and for all. With a determined look in his eyes, Suho summoned a guitar, a broom, and an old book from his inventory. A new idea began to form in his mind. He thought of the mad pulverization scholar. Maybe he could get help from that powerful, eccentric figure. Mystical energy surrounded Suho as a magical circle appeared. He focused on the skill book in his hands and began reading it carefully. The system confirmed his progress, indicating that Suho had learned the basic combination formula from the book. A large jar appeared in front of Suho, and a surge of confidence filled him as he inspected it. He thought to himself that, despite the seemingly basic combination formula, the success was guaranteed. An absolute formula always worked, no matter how simple. These items, often referred to as junk, were nothing special at first glance, but for those who knew how to use them, they were hidden treasures. Suho began placing the items into the jar with focused precision. His heart raced as the system's announcement echoed in his mind. The combination process had begun. He watched intently as the jar glowed brighter, its light growing more intense. Then, without warning, it burst into a golden radiance, filling the entire room with a warm glow. The system informed him that the combination had succeeded. As the light began to fade, Suho looked down at the jar to see a rare treasure floating within. A dazzling ring shimmered with a mystical aura, the energy surrounding it almost palpable. The system confirmed that he had created a rare treasure, even though the formula used was from the lowest level. Suho's smile widened as he reached out and held the ring in his hand. The sense of accomplishment swelled in his chest. The system provided more details. It was the first muumuu, an S+ grade item. When equipped, the ring would always apply colorless solitude. Suho admired the ring as he slid it onto his finger, feeling the surge of power flow through him. He knew that by creating the first ever item, he would receive bonus stats. The fact that Muumuu's base rank was S meant that the first ever title pushed it to S+. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how fortunate he was to be able to make use of such treasures. He marveled at how the privileges of a regressor allowed him to grow stronger, faster, and more capable. The first muumuu was the kind of treasure that would grow with him, becoming even more powerful as he did. This item would be a key asset on his journey. With a satisfied nod, Suho summoned his status window. He knew it was time to continue his preparations. He allocated 4 points to magic, while distributing the rest into strength and stamina. As the system confirmed his choices, Suho watched with satisfaction as his magic stat reached 100, and then continued to rise. The system congratulated him, marking his magic stat as red for the first time. Suho smiled, noting the significance of the moment. He was still below level 50, but his growth was happening at an impressive pace. The color system ranked stats, with each new level requiring 100 points to progress. Reaching red meant his magic stat had surpassed the usual limits for his level. While his purple rank had required 700 points before his regression, and he was still a long way from achieving that, Suho felt a new level of determination. He could now aim for a rank beyond purple, and the possibility excited him. With the stat distribution completed, Suho raised his hand to summon the next item he needed, the spear. The system's announcement confirmed the summoning of an old spear. Suho gripped it tightly, his gaze hardening with resolve. It was time to awaken the spear. He channeled his magical power into the weapon, focusing every ounce of his energy on it. The room lit up with a blinding light as the spear began to respond. Its consciousness slowly began to stir, and Suho could feel the drain on his mana as the spear absorbed his energy. Suho grimaced, feeling the strain intensify as the spear's power continued to grow. He had expected this. The spear's absorption capacity was immense, nearly overwhelming him. He gritted his teeth, trying to push through the exhaustion. The spear glowed brighter with every passing moment, its energy surging. Suho could sense that it was close to fully awakening. He poured every remaining drop of his mana into the weapon, determined that just a little more effort would bring the spear to life. The reaction was building. Suho knew he was on the cusp of something big. He just needed that final push. Finally, the system announced that the unknown spear had gained consciousness, congratulating Suho on partially awakening it. To his satisfaction, Suho had obtained the shadow spear with an A+ rank. A confident smile spread across his face as his eyes narrowed. The next challenge was ready to begin. The shadow spear glowed with a foreboding purple light, tendrils of swirling shadow wrapping around its shaft like living things. Suho paused for a moment, taking in the weapon's dark power. A system notification appeared, explaining the spear's origins. It had been one of the Shadow Lord's treasures, crafted from the bones of a shadow beast. The spear's potential was staggering. It allowed the wielder to summon it from the shadows at will and even repair it using surrounding darkness. Suho felt a surge of pride and satisfaction. If Zhang Pyongho had the subspace fortress, then the Shadow Lord, a monarch of spirits, had possessed this spear. The two were comparable figures, both notorious in their own right. Zhang Pyongho for his vast influence and the Shadow Lord for his criminal notoriety. Suho couldn't help but feel fortunate that the spear had fallen into his hands before anyone else could use it for evil again. Now, standing in an opulent room, he was ready to test its power. He swung it effortlessly, watching as the shadows seemed to come alive, twisting and swirling with his every movement. He extended his hand, and the spear returned to him instantly. "Shadow summon," he whispered. The ability to recall the spear at will would prove invaluable, especially with the challenges ahead. As if on cue, a portal opened before him, revealing a massive dragon resting in a barren landscape. Its scales gleamed ominously in the pale light, and Suho could immediately tell that a direct confrontation with the beast could end badly. The dragon's power radiated even from this distance, but it was currently resting, an opportunity. With no time to waste, Suho decided to capitalize on the element of surprise and strike first. His foot sparked with energy as he dashed forward, closing the distance in an instant. He stopped at a perfect position, his grip tightening around the shadow spear as he focused his magical energy into it. The shadows around him deepened, swirling faster and faster, gathering strength. His pulse quickened, a rush of excitement and resolve flooding his senses. This would be the moment that could shift the battle in his favor. With a swift motion, he charged forward, aiming for the dragon's weakest point. "Shadow strike!" Suho shouted as he swung the spear down with all his strength. The weapon released a powerful surge of energy, a torrent of darkness and force that surged toward the dragon. The impact was devastating, shaking the ground beneath them. The The dragon's eyes snapped open, blazing with fury as it let out a deafening roar. The sound reverberated through the air, a primal scream of rage and pain. Suho could see the dragon's scales quiver from the blow, a sign that his strike had done significant damage. But the tower dragon was far from finished. It reared its head back, eyes burning with wrath, and the air around it crackled with rising fury. Suho quickly leaped back, bracing for the dragon's retaliation, preparing himself for the battle that would come next. The dragon unleashed a wave of intense fear, its oppressive presence spreading through the area. Suho's instincts screamed for him to run, but he quickly dove into his subspace fortress just in time. Breathing heavily, he watched the massive creature through the portal, a smirk forming on his face as he gripped his shadow spear. Having avoided the fear's effects by entering the fortress, he planned to keep executing his hit-and-run tactic until the dragon fell. After a while, the dragon's eye glowed with malice, its rage building as Suho repeated his strategy. But this time, the dragon's reverse scale was cracked, and it was now on high alert, refusing to let its guard down. Suho realized his old strategy was no longer viable. It was time for a direct confrontation. He charged forward, threw his spear with precision, and pierced the dragon's defenses, driving it deep into its eye. Blood poured out as the dragon howled in pain, its body cracking under the strain, and it activated its fear skill. Suho felt the weight of the dragon's fear wash over him, threatening to overwhelm him, but he fought through it, summoning a burst of energy. He drank a purification potion, the blue liquid calming his nerves and clearing away the lingering fear. Grinning, Suho tightened his grip on the spear. "It won't work again, you fool," he shouted, his voice booming across the battlefield. With one final surge of power, he charged, focusing all his remaining strength into his sword, ready to land the decisive blow.